every day that I was in Gaza, I saw a new kid shot in the head. I'm not the one they even call about kids who've been shot in the head. I found them in the ICU, so I actually only saw the ones that made it to the hospital and were actually intubated, and meaning putting a breathing tube down their throat, and then sent to the ICU. The ones that came in shot in the head and dead, I never even would have found out about unless I happened
So
to be.
this is every day over a 2 week period you're
Yes,
seeing.
every day over a 2 week period. The first patient I took to the operating room was a 26-year-old woman named Isra. She was so malnourished when I met her that I thought she was a grandmother. She actually was standing in the entrance to her living room, watching her 4 children play. She noticed that some sort of munition came through the ceiling, collapsed the ceiling down, exploded, threw her out of the door, and that she saw the ceiling collapse on all her 4 children. None of those 4 kids are counted in the death because they can't get to a hospital, to a morgue.
We are here delighted to be with Feroze Sidhwa, a critical care and trauma surgeon. He spent 2 weeks in Gaza early in this year, I think at the end of March, towards the kind of middle of April. What I want to ask you first is a kind of general question. What were your expectations before arriving to the European hospital, if you had expectations? And then what was the reality that you saw when you arrived?
Yeah, I knew what I was getting into in terms of how violent Gaza was at the time, and still is. In fact, maybe worse now. I was still expecting to find a functional hospital. They had told us that European hospital was itself a displaced persons camp. So on the grounds of the hospital was a DP camp, tents everywhere, And in addition to that, people were actually housed in the hospital, not the patients who were admitted. They were there too, obviously, but there were tents lining the hallways of the hospital. So I can't remember the exact numbers of people who lived inside the hospital, but they were inside. Other people were in tents outside. So the hospital, both within and without, was a DP camp, which I've never seen before. That was pretty unusual. But what struck me about European hospital was how dysfunctional it was, and it wasn't from any lack of trying of the staff there or anything. But the hospital was there's two components to it. One is just the way the hospital system in general, and European specifically, has just been degraded by direct Israeli assaults on the hospital system, and also starving it of supplies coming in from the outside. Like if I remember correctly, about 850 pounds of supplies on British Airways. Mark Perlmutter, who I went with, took about 750 pounds of orthopedic implants. Plenty of, and in fact, other people brought even more stuff because they bought it in Egypt, and then we brought it over because at that time the Rafah border was open, the Rafah crossing was open, and you could just drive that stuff in and pretend it was your own personal effects, and they just scanned it, so it didn't have to go on a truck over to Kerem Shalom, be inspected by the Israelis, then come back and then go up, which is, as we all know, is barely getting anything in. So we took huge amounts of supplies. We worked through most of it in the first week and a half. And after that, we just had what the hospital had left. But there were there was no soap. Like literally, there was no soap at European hospital. We would eat dinner. It was during Ramadan. So what food there was, we would eat that at iftar in the Palestine College of Nursing, which was a building just adjacent to the hospital. And somebody had brought a bar of soap for themselves, and they'd left it in the bathroom, in the common bathroom that was there. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, a bar of soap! I can wash my hands. This is great." It was just completely wild. There's no soap anywhere. The medical staff themselves live in the hospital. The OR staff lives literally in the operating room, in the sterile processing facility, in the clean corridors. It's just completely outrageous. So yeah, no, European was a total disaster. I expected the electricity to be inconsistent. I expected the water to be inconsistent, and those things they were. I expected it to be crowded. It was. I expected it to be kind of overwhelming in a sensory fashion. One thing that was striking about being in Gaza generally, but at a because you're in this walled compound of the hospital, it's kind of like its own little ecosystem. And Gaza is such a young territory. I forget the exact numbers, but I think about half of people are under the age of 18, and I think 40% are under the age of 15. a very, very young place. And so there's just kids everywhere. I mean, it's just, they're just all over the place. In children, I don't know if it's the Arab world generally or Gaza specifically, but children are allowed to be very, very free, and they just kind of run amok until until they're old enough to understand things. And so it's great to see them running around trying to have a good time. You see plenty of kids with a limb missing or with bandages on or something like that, but they're still trying to enjoy themselves. They're still trying to play. Um, but you're just struck by how many kids there actually are. And then they I went with the Palestinian American Medical Association of the World Health Organization, and they told us that there was bombardment near Khan Yunis was laid siege to in December, I believe, December of 2023, and it had been under bombardment since then. But I was shocked by how powerful the explosions were. The first day or two, they were just rumbles, but after that, they would shake the buildings. They blew out some of the windows on the third floor. One knocked me out of bed once. Some of them would knock. Some of the explosions knocked surgical instruments off the table, stuff like that. It was pretty shocking. What was really interesting about that, though, was the one day that I actually got out of the hospital in a car. I walked outside. They told us I walked outside, but in a car we were able to go around Khan Yunis and Rafah just for like a few hours. And when we did that, I realized there are no large buildings anywhere near European Hospital other than the Palestine College of Nursing, which wasn't being bombed. There's nothing. So these explosions were miles away, like literally miles away from me. But I thought they were like 2 blocks away or something. It was very that actually made it scarier because I realized, oh, I was scared shitless, and but I'm not even anywhere near the bombardment like I thought I was. This is really it's something, definitely something.
What were the first few days like? Give us a sense of the kind of injured, people that have been bombed, people that have been pulled out from the rubble. These are the survivors. It sounds like you're really running on you're in a hospital where the kind of basic necessities are very, very scarce. Yeah, just walk us through the kind of first few days, the challenges, the sense of the scale of the crisis as you kind of saw it.
Yeah, so European is a 220 bed hospital that has 1,500 people admitted, or back then it's different now. Yeah, 220 beds, 1,500 people admitted. So you can imagine there's oftentimes several children sharing the same bed. There's usually rooms that are meant to hold 3 people are holding 7, 8, 9, 10. Really, really dramatic. So it's extremely crowded. Nothing is sterility is not. That's a joke. Nothing's even clean. There's women cutting up vegetables in the ICU sink. There's like I said, the OR staff is actually living in the operating room. It's not a functional place. There are tents in the hallways lining, and by the second week, actually blocking the hallways. How you go from like the emergency or the ED to the OR or the ED to the ICU. Those hallways are lined, so they were maybe 20 feet wide, but actually they're 4 feet wide because there's a tent where families are living on either side, 10, 15 people in a 6 by 6 foot space, and you can just barely get your stretcher through there. You're worried you're going to cut some kid's leg off as he crawls in front of you, and you don't even notice him. It's an extremely dysfunctional environment. On top of that, European Hospital is constantly receiving traumatically injured people, and I think on average every day. There were some days where we didn't have a mass casualty event, but there were several days where we had multiple mass casualty events. So on average, more than one a day. Mass casualty event, meaning an explosion or a shooting of several people at the same time, is usually an explosion. So sometimes 3 or 4, but sometimes 24 people show up all at the same time. Now, most of them don't have life-threatening injuries, thankfully. A lot of them have disfiguring and severe injuries that are not life-threatening. And the reason is because the people with life-threatening injuries are dead. They died on scene. These we were talking about it before you started hitting record, I think, but the bombs that are being used are they're incredibly high energy weapons. They are just obliterating the buildings that they're fired at, and then leaving aside now that they're mostly being fired at tents. But they just obliterate the thing. And so people who say have a shrapnel injury to the chest where they're bleeding severely, well, in the United States, they'd be extracted from the building quickly. They'd get to me in the trauma bay. I would take them straight to the operating room. Maybe we have a chance of stopping them from bleeding to death. In Gaza, it takes hours to extract them from the house. If they can be extracted, they're going to die before anybody. Severe head injuries. Again, if you get a concrete block smashes your head and you have a bad traumatic brain injury in the U.S. or UK, wherever, any normal place that isn't under military attack, you would get in an ambulance quickly and be brought to the hospital, and a neurosurgeon would do a craniectomy. Again, you might die still, but you have a chance. In Gaza, that's all just gone. There's no way to extract these people quickly. Sometimes there's just no way to extract them at all because there's no heavy moving equipment that's available. And again, you often have a ceiling that just collapses right on top of you. So, like, for example, the first patient not the first patient I treated, but the first patient I took to the operating room was a 26-year-old woman named Isra. She was so malnourished when I met her that I thought she was a grandmother. It took her days to be able to actually tell us this, but she actually was standing in the entrance to her living room, or I don't know if it was her living room, but the living room where they were staying, watching her 4 children play. And I doubt she actually remembers this, but she says she does. Just because it's so traumatic, I can't imagine it. But she noticed that some sort of munition came through the ceiling, collapsed the ceiling down, exploded, threw her out of the door, and that she saw the ceiling collapse on all her 4 children, like 12 years old enough, or 10 years old enough. I can't remember, something like that. That's outrageous, I mean, and just to point something out, none of those 4 kids are counted in the death because they can't get to a hospital, to a morgue, or not to a hospital, but to a morgue. And most morgues there are the hospital. So this was the kind of thing that we saw regularly. It was these major mass casualty events. That was what we spent most of our time on. So Isra is kind of a good example of the typical patient in this situation. So I'm a trauma surgeon, which means my job is to stop people from bleeding to death or from losing limbs from vascular injuries and from dealing with intestinal injuries, with lung and heart injuries from traumatic causes, shootings, stabbings, explosions, car crashes, whatever. Well, with Isra, she had 3 fractures in her 2 legs. Both of her hands are severely burned. Her face is stippled with shrapnel, but thankfully her chest, abdomen, pelvis are uninjured because that's just how the explosion worked out. So she can survive. She's severely injured, of course. She could still die of sepsis or something later on, but she's survivable. She's not going to bleed to death in the time course that it takes to get to the hospital. So we took her to the OR. It took me and Mark Perlmutter, who was there with me. It took us. He's an orthopedic surgeon. It took us, and another surgeon was there as well. He prefers not to talk about it publicly. I just won't say his name, but another general and trauma surgeon. And it took the 3 of us, I think, 4 hours to place the external fixators to realign her bones, to do the operative debridements, to debride her hands from the burn injuries, to find the right supplies needed to put these dressings on properly. All of these things, it takes hours. Well, 20 people came in with her, and European hospital has 4 operating rooms. How are you? There's no way that you'd have to take I don't know, like Massachusetts General Hospital or something, like some enormous institution, and plop it down right in the middle of Con Yunis to have any chance of dealing with these things, just in terms of the volume. And that's leaving aside the severity, right? So like Isra got that operation the first day. We operated on her every second or third day that we were there, right? Because she still has, these fractures are still open. She's still getting antibiotics. She has this giant chunk of her left thigh that was blown out of her that needs regular debridement. Otherwise it's going to get infected and she'll die. And that all is leaving totally aside that she has no psychiatric care. She watched her 4 children die in front of her. In fact, her whole family was killed. She had extended family like cousins and people who showed up eventually. Um, and of course, they would comfort her, they would care for her, but like something you need you probably, I mean, most mothers I would imagine would need some kind of, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I can only imagine the damage that does and how challenging it must be to get over it. None of this is available. But, you know, so these are extremely the situation, I guess, to like summarize it, is one in which the healthcare system has been deliberately and violently degraded in the services that it can provide. And then at the same time, the services it needs to provide has been shot up by 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude. So it's obviously a total disaster, you know?
So this is something most of us just simply can't imagine. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you is, on the one hand, you have Israeli spokespeople, consistently saying that the numbers of civilians being killed are lower than the figures that people are saying. On the other hand, you have, you speak to people that are there, and other kind of people making estimates. They say the figure, if you want to put it that way, is likely much higher than 40 plus thousand, or the exact number is put at the moment. What do you think the likelihood is that the death toll, the murder toll, however people might frame it, is much higher than it's purported to be currently?
There's absolutely no chance that it's lower. There's literally zero chance of that. The 100, there's no possible way that would be. So just some background on this. The claim that Hamas, because Hamas runs the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is true, because Hamas was the government in Gaza, the claim that it's misrepresenting and the claim is that it's inventing dead people. That's the only way this statement makes it. That's completely ridiculous. The way that there's, you don't have to take my word for it because I haven't studied it. There are at least two that I know of. There are at least 2 academic level studies published in peer-reviewed journals. No question about their validity. Nobody claims that they're falsified or some nonsense. Which took totally different methodologies that have verified that not only is the Hamas death count from previous Israeli military attacks, not only is it accurate, it's actually an undercount. If I'm remembering the number correctly, it was an undercount of 13% of violent deaths, which is hardly surprising. A lot of these weapons just obliterate the human being. Well, Hamas identifies, the Gaza Ministry of Health identifies people by their ID card once they're dead. It's only once they're fully identified that their identity is released. So their ID has to be known, their date of birth, whatever demographic data goes into that spreadsheet. I have no clue, honestly. And so it's not surprising that there's going to be people who are undercounted. Like, for example, there are actually children who've been born during this act, whatever you want to call it, who were given a death certificate without ever receiving a birth certificate, right? In fact, if you look at the number, this was a shocking statistic. The number of under 1-year-olds who have been killed with violence, I'm not talking about starvation, disease, nothing, purely by military violence, is almost the same now as the number of Israeli civilians who were killed on October 7th. Under 1-year-olds. Half of them were born during the attack. They might have been born in a tent. In fact, they were very likely born in a tent. Because getting to a hospital might have been impossible. They don't have a birth certificate. They don't have an ID number. They're probably not even counted in the dead yet. Now, the only way to, and we saw this in like Iraq and plenty of other places too, but Iraq became the big political example. The only way to really know how many people have died in a conflict that involves massive social disruption like this one is to do a study, to do some sort of either a cluster-derived or other the public health level studies. And that obviously can't happen right now. It could be done, but the Israelis won't let anybody go in and do it. Oh, it's for your safety. Okay, well, I accept it's not for my safety. So there's no actual way to know how many people have died. The likelihood, again, it is literally an impossibility that it is fewer people than the Ministry of Health's numbers state. Now, there's a second component to it, which is that the Ministry of Health data is only people who show up at morgues. In Gaza, most morgues are attached to hospitals, and I don't know there's 36 hospitals in Gaza, and at any time, anywhere between 24 and 26 of them are completely out of commission because of direct Israeli attacks. So again, you can imagine very unlikely that there are plenty of there's huge swaths of Gaza where the dead are simply not being counted. But more importantly than that, in terms of counting the dead, more importantly is that Israel is deliberately starving people in Gaza. Everybody knows this. It's not my assessment. Senator Van Hollen has said this. Human Rights Watch says it. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and other American senators say it. Oxfam says it. MSF says, like, literally anybody everybody who has anything to do with looking at starvation in the modern period says it. It's just not, the Alex DeWall, the leading historian of famine in the modern period, says it. Everyone. So it's hardly controversial to say, even if the Israelis deny it, which of course they do because nobody admits to starving people on purpose. So it's, you might argue in, like, if somebody starved to death in World War II when we were attacking Germany, okay, fine. I mean, that's awful, but it's not some dastardly thing on the part of the Allies because they weren't deliberately starving Germans to death. In this case, I say we, I'm an American, we and the Israelis are deliberately starving Gazans. So it makes sense. It makes perfect sense to count starvation and starvation-related deaths in the death toll. Well, I actually wrote a letter to the Biden administration about this. It was signed by me and 44 other physicians and nurses who've been to Gaza since October 7th. The most, and this is not an estimate of the dead, this is the most conservative estimate that we could possibly come up with, looking at the data from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, from the U.S.'s own famine early warning system, and from other data. The most conservative estimate that we could come up with for starvation-related deaths, and I'm going to try and remember right, I think it was 37,000 so far. That's literally 3 orders of magnitude higher than what's been reported. Now, is it possible that fewer people have died? So yes, absolutely it is. But if you look at the data that is available, which admittedly is not very good, and there's, again, a reason for that. Israel won't allow data to be collected. But if you look at the data that exists, that is the most conservative estimate you can come up with. So the number, and keep in mind back then, the number of, that was July 25th that we released the letter, the known violent death count at that time, I believe, was 35 or 36,000. So they're approximately equivalent to. Again, going by the best data that exists. I hope it's lower. I mean, I don't want Palestinians to die, certainly not of starvation. It's incredibly cruel. And furthermore, you have to remember that's mostly children. It's children under 5 are the most vulnerable people to starvation-related deaths. Actually, when we wrote that letter, I came across a nurse practitioner, a pediatric nurse practitioner. I think her name was Asma, if I remember correctly, who, because I was reaching out to every healthcare provider I could find who'd been to Gaza, asking them if they'd like to sign this letter. And she, when she said, "Yeah, thanks for the letter, I'm happy to sign it," and she just kind of, I think she just wrote it, just not even meaning to just wanting to let me know. She said that every day, I think she was at Emirati Hospital for Women and Children. She said, every day I was there, I saw children who had been born relatively healthy return to the hospital dying of starvation and dehydration. And so I called her and I said, "Hey, Asma, I just want to make sure that, because that's, only like 30-something deaths from starvation-related causes have been reported in the press. And that's hardly surprising. It's not, it's hardly surprising that most of these deaths would not be reported in the press because they're going to die in a tent by themselves or with their family. Their family's going to bury them somewhere and no one's ever going to know about it." But so I called her and I said, "Hey, I just want to make sure, because if it's okay with you, I'll quote you in the letter, but I need to make sure that that's literally true. Like literally that happened on it." She said, "Feroze, every day I was there for I think it was 2 weeks that she was there, every single day, at least one, usually more than one." Well, that means that just in the 2 weeks she was there, she saw more children die of starvation, or approximately the same number, as have been reported publicly in the whole Gaza Strip. That means it's a far greater problem than is acknowledged, right? So it's really crucial to understand that the numbers are far, far, far higher And then there's another, again, I don't know how long you want to spend on this, obviously, but there's another question, which is people with chronic diseases whose healthcare has been disrupted. And again, I'm sure that happened to someone with diabetes during the American attack on Germany in World War II. You know, they couldn't get healthcare, and so they died of complications from diabetes. But the U.S. wasn't deliberately destroying the healthcare system in Germany, right? That's a different thing. Here, the Israelis are, again, the U.S. and Israel are clearly and deliberately and really quite obnoxiously, in my opinion, directly attacking the healthcare system under the most absurd of pretexts. I mean, we were talking about it again before you, I think, before you hit record. There's no every claim about Hamas. You know, the Hamas Pentagon is under Shifa Hospital. Hamas is running every hospital in Gaza for, you know, absurd. It's totally ridiculous. So that direct attack on the healthcare system, it has expected consequences. People will die of diseases that could have been easily prevented. So again, it makes sense to count them, and the war did in this case. And you know, we very, I have to say, quite arbitrarily, we estimated we guessed that the lowest number of people that could possibly have died up until that point of chronic diseases that got out of control was about 5,000. So when you put it all together, again, not a most likely estimate, a lowest possible estimate with the currently available data at that time, July 25th, was 92,000. That's, you know, Gaza has 2.2 million people in it. It's a huge number. It's a huge percentage of the population. There was just to finish this thought, there was a UN report. I'm trying to remember the name of the UN agency that put it out, but they pointed out that even just going by the official numbers, meaning the Hamas Ministry of Health data, which again, as we know, is an undercount of violent deaths, but just going by that, forget starvation, forget everything else, just the violent deaths, to find a time when a population was killed at this rate, you have to go back to the 1994 genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda.
Oh.
That is outrageous. There's nothing that compares to this in the modern period. It is utterly outrageous. It's just, I've honestly just kind of run out of words. I happen to give a lot of talks about this now, and mostly just to community groups, but sometimes to a university audience or a medical school audience or something like that. And it's kind of hard to put into words what this means. Like you have to talk, you have to give detail after detail after detail, and it could go on for, we could talk about it for like 10 hours describing how bad Gaza is. We still wouldn't have gotten to the grittiest of the details, the worst, you know, some of the worst of it. There are no words to describe these things anymore. It's an utter outrage on everything that people should be holding dear to. That it's wild. It's a lot.
We've said it before. It's quite literally incomprehensible. So something else I wanted to ask you, Feroze, was that, you know, one thing we consistently hear from Israel, which claims to be the most moral army in the world, if there's such a thing, one of the justifications given for targeting civilian areas and hospitals is that there's Hamas and fighters running all over the place, all over these hospitals, and that there's huge network of tunnels underneath all these hospitals. Did you see or hear from your colleagues about these huge numbers of fighters in hospitals and this vast network of tunnels under the hospitals?
No, I never saw a single combatant while I was there. And again, it's important to realize that, you know, I get my, you know, I was there, so my what I saw is relevant, but it's important to remember that what I personally saw, maybe I'm just dumb or I don't know what a fighter looks like, who knows, but literally no one who's been there saw this. Not a single person, not a single physician, not a single nurse, nobody who's been there has seen any Hamas fighter running around any hospital. It's important to remember the Israelis have been claiming this for like literally a decade, that Gaza's hospital, they used to just claim Shifa Hospital. Now they just, I guess, arbitrarily have decided that literally every hospital in Gaza is actually the Hamas Pentagon. But they've been claiming for decades, or excuse me, not for decades, for a decade, that Shifa Hospital is a Hamas command and control center. There's a few ways. It's bonkers. I mean, it has to be, if someone ever writes a history of how the American, especially the American media, but even the British, how media, corporate media, I guess you would say, treated that claim as having any possible basis in fact. If somebody writes a history about that, it'll never be believed by any serious person. They'll be like, "There's no way. It's impossible that these people acted this credulously. It's just beyond impossible." You know, the probably the most famous foreign physician or meaning non-Palestinian physician, who was working at Shifa Hospital was Mons Gilbert. He worked there for I think 30 years or so, like a very, very long time. Um, and he said that never once, literally never once in his decades of work there, he's an anesthesiologist and
This is a Norwegian
he's a Norwegian, yeah, he's a Norwegian anesthesiologist and an emergency room, if I remember correctly. Smart guy. He's written well. He's he's a sensible fellow. I've met him. He said that literally never once did he see anyone from Hamas or any other armed group at the hospital. And again, in his decades of working there, Amnesty International wrote a report. I forget when it came out, but they noted that at some point Hamas, meaning not during war, I believe it was after Operation Protective Edge, but I might have the time wrong. But they pointed out that at one point Hamas used an outpatient clinic area of the hospital as an interrogation unit. Now that's obviously very bad. You shouldn't do that. But there's no scenario, but that's literally the only time anybody has ever been able to associate Hamas with Shifa Hospital, or any Palestinian armed group with Shifa Hospital, or any other hospital. And again, you shouldn't. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't torture people, so that's a crime in and of itself, which Hamas was doing there in quite brutal fashion. But that is not, that doesn't offer Hamas any sort of military advantage in 2024. That's ridiculous. Like, that's completely absurd. That's just not how the laws of war work. If if a general happens to walk by I'm at my hospital right now. If a general happens to walk past the window, some country that's at war with the United States can't just drop a bomb on me. That's not how it works. That's not. Nobody thinks. If that was the case, Hamas could bomb every hospital in Israel right now. Nobody thinks that's the case. That's insane. You know, it's totally. And this kind of weird interpretation of the laws of war really generalizes when it comes to anything that we talk about Israel-Palestine. So the Israelis publicly, they're perfectly public about it because it came out in 972 magazine. They had to talk about it. They're very public about the fact that they deliberately and consciously target people who are thought to be fighters when they go home for dinner to see their families. Well, it's quite obvious that they're going home to see their families, not to go kill their families or something. That's ridiculous. Like, they're not engaged in military activity when they're playing with their children. Nevertheless, that's when they choose to kill them. And they choose to kill them with airdropped munitions, bombs, which are virtually guaranteed to kill everybody else in the house, including their entire family, right? That's not how the laws of war work. Nobody thinks that, again, nobody thinks Hamas can go raid a kibbutz and kill special forces guys in their beds while they're sleeping. That's outrageous. I mean, if that's the case, why is anyone upset about October 7th? Oh, yeah, we were just killing soldiers preemptively. It's insane. No one thinks that's acceptable. And further, it's not just no one thinks it. The laws of war state that it's not. When someone is hors de combat, meaning out of combat, they're not a legitimate military target. So this kind of crazed weirdness about what constitutes a military objective is just very, very strange. And I've never seen anyone that it applies to other than the Palestinians. And the American press just treats these claims with total credulity. Just any crazed claim you make, it's fine. Do you remember? I believe it was under Shifa. Yeah, it was Shifa. There was I think it was in the France 24 or something like that. I think it was one of their reporters went into the tunnel, the big tunnel they found under Shifa Hospital, which he knew full well was there because they built it themselves. They built Shifa Hospital in the 80s. But they went down there and there was a calendar on the wall. It was literally just a blank calendar that somebody had written in Arabic the dates, names of days in the month. And now I don't speak Arabic. I can sound out the letters. I don't know what they mean, but I was like, I think those are just the days. And yeah, yeah, it turns like the Israeli spokesperson that took him down there, took the reporter down there, said, "Oh, look, this is a schedule of terrorists um, watching hostages down here or some stupid thing." And finally, people had to point out on the internet that's just a blank calendar. What are you talking about? It's just totally crazy. How is it possible that a reporter standing there with this guy doesn't read Arabic or can't even notice that it's the same Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, Tuesday? Oh wow, it's repeating. Did they have a 7 days rotating? Do terrorists take 6 days off out of the week? That is, what are you talking? It's crazy, you know. The level of credulity and how these things are covered is just outrageous. Like I said, no, it was someone will write a history about this period and people will just refuse to believe it. It's
Yeah,
outrageous.
yeah, they won't believe it. And these are supposedly credible mainstream outlets, and you have to wonder. I've worked in TV production. You wonder what is the thought process for people signing off on this stuff. That people on the internet could just literally call this out and say, "Look, it's a calendar." I mean, I'm saying it out loud to you now, and it just sounds. It's just a height of ridiculousness.
Again, yeah. If some Laotian peasant or somebody who'd never heard of any of this stuff just listened to that, they'd be like, "No, these guys are idiots. What are they talking about? There's no way that's true. There's no way that that's true." Yet it is. It's outrageous. It's just
So something, yeah, something I've got to ask you about, Feroze. I'm very conscious of your time, and I appreciate it. Is I think some of the work and some of the accounts that you and your colleague Mark and perhaps others gave, which was very, very important, was about the reports and accounts of children coming into hospitals who'd been shot in the head, multiple times in some instances, if I've understood it correctly. What I really wanted to ask you, because I know you've talked about that, is what is because some people might say, well, the vast majority of soldiers and snipers, X, Y, and Z, they're not targeting children, or they're certainly not hitting children on a big scale. What is your sense that, I guess, the scale of this problem? Because I think you mentioned, or others have mentioned, that on a daily basis they were seeing children come in with bullet wounds to the head, etc. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so just to give you the background on it, so I was in, like you mentioned, I was there from March 25th to April 8th, and when on the first day that I was there, we took a little, you just take a tour of the hospital so you know where you are. Me and Mark walked into the ICU and we found two kids, one probably 8 or 9, I can't remember now exactly, but 8 or 9 years old, both of them brain dead from gunshot wounds to the head. I didn't. I was the nurse just pointed to her head and said, "Shot, shot." She didn't speak English very well. They're probably injured in an explosion. But then I looked at them, and there was nothing else wrong with them. It was just bandages on their head. So I pulled up their CT scans, and sure enough, it's hard to confirm everything 100%. But based on the scan, it certainly looked like they had been shot. That was strange. It's like, here's two kids at the same time. That's weird. Every day, there was one day where we didn't, but then there were multiple days where there were more than one. So every day that I was in Gaza, I saw a new kid shot in the head. Every single day. And you got to remember another thing. I'm not the one they even call about kids who've been shot in the head. I found them in the ICU, so I actually only saw the ones that made it to the hospital and were actually intubated, and meaning putting a breathing tube down their throat, and then sent to the ICU. The ones that came in shot in the head and dead, I never even would have found out about unless I happened.
So this is every day over a 2-week period.
Yes, every day over a 2-week period. So when I left Gaza, I was leaving and I was thinking, man, I kind of assumed there must have just been some unusually sadistic sniper or soldier or whatever in somewhere around European hospital, because that it struck me as unlikely that is happening throughout Gaza. I then went to a Doctors Against Genocide convention or something like that, and I sat next to a guy named Thayer Ahmed. He's an emergency room doc. He had been in Gaza earlier than I was, on the western side of Khan Yunis at Nasser Medical Complex. I was on the eastern side. He was on the western side. And we sat next to each other on a panel. We had never met each other before that. And then we were talking afterwards, and I said, I can't believe the number of kids I saw shot in the head. And he kind of like perked up. He said, oh, yeah, no, I couldn't believe it either. Every day I saw a kid shot in the head. And I was like, wait, you really? I'm okay. So then
So,
when I
so he's seeing this. So sorry to cut you, Fro. So he's seeing this prior to March, just so I
yes,
understand this.
he's seeing this in a totally different hospital on the other side of the city at a different time period. So now I'm thinking, okay, two people have seen the same thing. So when I wrote the letter, uh, I talked to several other people, and they actually all said the same thing. Sometimes not literally every single day, but like every one of them had repeatedly seen kids shot in the head, sometimes the chest and the head. And so we wrote that in the letter that everybody who treated kids saw kids shot in the head on a daily basis. You know, that's outrageous. There's no the Israeli army is not full of a bunch of idiots. That it's not some it's not some disorganized band of nutcases running around. They know who they're shooting. They know who their snipers are shooting. Their scopes have video equipment on them. They're most of them are wearing body cams. They know exactly what's going on. And I don't mean the people shooting them. I don't mean the people shooting these children. I mean the higher ups know what's going on. They're well aware. Now, people have disagreed with me about this, but I seriously doubt that like Yoav Gallant is saying I want 10 kids murdered today. That strikes me as very unlikely. But they know what's happening and they're allowing it to continue happening. It's still going on. Everybody who comes back says the same thing still. So even though there's been a public letter, not only from us, Canadian and British physicians have written public letters saying they saw the same thing as well. So it's not some secret. Even if the Israeli army didn't know about it beforehand. Like my letter is housed on Dropbox, so I can see which countries in the world. So I know there's about 200 people in Israel that downloaded our letter. So I know they've seen it. It's not some secret. And they speak English just fine. So that it's being at the very least tolerated, which means it and so if you tolerate something for 11 months, there's no different from that in making policy, right? It's the same thing. So
Yeah.
it's that is not there's no credible scenario where you can say this is accidental anymore. You drop a bomb on something, even though, like we talked about, they're not really legitimate military targets. There basically are no legitimate military targets in Gaza. But you drop a bomb on something, and a kid happens to be nearby. Okay, fine. I mean, if the dropping of the bomb was legitimate, the child happened to get hurt. That's sad, but it's not evidence of a crime necessarily. It's awful, but it's not criminal necessarily. Shooting kids in the head on a daily basis throughout Gaza for 11 months straight, that's criminal. And again, the point of our letter and the reason I talk about this at all, I don't really care what Israel does. I care what my government supports, and I'm guessing you're about the same way. I don't if these like Netanyahu famously said when Biden for some reason decided to pretend that he was going to cut off aid for the Rafah invasion. When he said if the Americans don't send us weapons, then we'll fight with our fingernails. Okay, good. You go do that. Have fun fighting with your fingernails. I'm going to stay away from you as far as away from you as I can get. And I don't want any part of it. I really don't. I want absolutely nothing to do with people who shoot children in the head. I want absolutely nothing to do with people who starve pregnant women and their babies. I want nothing to do with people who destroy an entire society all the way down to the water infrastructure and then claim that they're not hurting civilians. This is outrageous. There's no reason that my government should be involved in it, or anybody.
Just on that point, very quickly, I've just got a couple more quick questions for you, Feroze. I could talk to you all day about this. Actually, it's very, very important and very enlightening. Actually, but I've done some coverage about the water crisis in Gaza, which was bad, like even before October the 7th. I guess my question is, along with water, really, how are a lack of just basic life-needing necessities, including water, how is that sort of worsening the already terrible crisis in Gaza? If that makes sense.
It's a disaster. So the Gaza's, and so I'm sorry, I do have to go in about 3 minutes, but Gaza's overall disaster picture, I'm not even sure. I was going to say public health picture, but that seems like putting too fine a point on it. Got the problems in Gaza that are leading to mass death, let's put it that way, are a combination of military violence directly at human beings, obviously, are a combination of the destruction of most of the housing stock, so people are living outside, most of the wash infrastructure, water, sanitation, and hygiene. Oxfam has a very good report on this called Water War Crimes that everybody should read. It's horrifying. You take away people's ability to wash their hands, and you concentrate them massively in, Gaza was already one of the most densely populated places in the world. Now it's 100 times worse. Oxfam actually, if you look at that report, Oxfam estimates that if Israel actually concentrates 1 million people in the Mawasi area, basically the strip of beach on the western side of Gaza, they can expect to get 2.7 liters of water per person per day. And that's not for drinking. That's for all purposes, drinking, cooking, cleaning, bathing, everything, which is totally outrageous. And there will be one toilet and shower for every 4,200 people. That's just insane. Now, on top of that, none of that water is potable, like you're pointing out. The water situation was terrible before. It's easily the worst in the world, and I mean by a wide margin. But not there's nothing else even close. So it's that the destruction of the healthcare system is another major part of it, and then starvation. So you concentrate a population, you take away its ability to keep itself clean, you take away its ability to receive healthcare, and you take away its immune system by starving. What do you think is going to happen? Well, polio and other crazy shit is going to happen. That's the problem, and that is what is leading to Gaza becoming, I'm going to certain choice of words, maybe I won't, but that is what is leading to Gaza becoming a zone. So I forget which UN representative said this, but they said Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children, and that's accurate. It's one of the youngest societies in the world, and it's just becoming.
Just very lastly, I think I read somewhere you said you feel guilty now that you've left Gaza. If you don't mind me asking, why do you feel that way? And what's been what have you? How do you feel having come back? How do you move forward from this? What are the lessons you've taken from this?
Yeah, it's a strange thing, but when we were standing there waiting for the vans to come to take us out of Gaza, we were standing with a man who he'd worked as a security guard. He would kind of keep the Palestinian kids and stuff away from the nursing college where half the team lived and most of the internationals lived. That day, it was early in the morning, and he had his little kid with him, probably like 2 years old, something like that. And we're standing there. He's just a normal little boy, and everybody on the team, you can see we're all just looking at each other. Everybody has the exact same impression. Why do we get to leave and he doesn't? Why do it doesn't make sense. Like I admit that it doesn't make sense. Like I don't live here. That's why I get to leave. But why does this kid have to be condemned to live in this just utterly bizarre version of hell? Why? There's no reason. How do I deal with that? Try to go back. I'm hoping I can go back in November. So it's getting in is very uncertain. It's difficult. That's not difficult, but I'm hoping I can go back in. And another way is honestly by talking to people about it. Like I mentioned, I talk to community groups like 2 or 3 a week at this point. I'm near the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm organizing this letter campaign to the Biden and Harris administration, and just trying to for me. The most important thing is to get this to stop. I can go there and do all the surgery in the world. It doesn't matter.
Feroze, I want to really just commend you for your work. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy doing important work now. You're back home. Hope we can speak again soon, but thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks. Nice to meet you.